Okay.
Welcome everyone to another SBSN English podcast. Today we are doing To Kill a Mockingbird. This is our second episode. Today I'll be focusing on rebellious adults and useless governments. I'm just saying what the novel seems to say. It is quite a radical novel, and I think there's something to be learned here, not just for children, but for all the adults out there. Literature does offer lessons. I think presently we're far too trusting of our governments, far too obedient, and far too sheep-like, perhaps. No offense meant to anyone, any of the sheep out there, but let's see what our good novel teaches us beyond racial discrimination. First, I wanted to focus on the political context of this novel and maybe how it influenced its writing. Sasha, did you want to read the first paragraph, or shall I read it?
Harper Lee's world?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. The world in which Harper Lee wrote her novel was not that of the awful depression in which her novel is set. She lived during the Cold War days, shortly after the dreaded McCarthy era. Thanks to the media, America at that time was a radically pro-capitalist, anti-communist world of fear, hatred, and dogmatism. How do you think this era influenced authors, artists, and free-thinking people? How might it have influenced Lee and her novel?
Those are questions for me. No. How do I think the era influenced artists, intellectuals? Well, on the one hand, it was devastating to them. Many lost their jobs in the entertainment sector, Hollywood, as the elites worked hard to make sure that anti-capitalist, pro-communist, and generally critical thinking was not spread through the media. They wanted to keep everyone passive, incapable of critical thinking. Secondly, how did it influence authors? I think it forced some of them to give up and just to become script writers of bad movies and bad novels. But some took the time to be clever and hide what they wanted to say with literary devices, with a lot of subtlety. And this is one of the reasons why books from this period need to be read very carefully. I'm talking about Chrysalids, Catcher in the Rye, Harper Lee's, and none other comes to mind. In fact, actually, authors have been in this habit for quite some time. You know, the McCarthy era was not the first time authors were forced to censor themselves or hide, conceal their meaning. Okay. So we will be reading carefully, as usual. Could you do the introduction too?
Sure. Nowadays, adults are rarely rebellious, and we mostly associate rebelliousness with children. Of course, not all adults are sheep or criminals who prey on each other. Protests and strikes do happen, and other manifestations of rebellion, such as anarchist communities, vaccine non-consenters, tax protesters, and countercultural adults do exist. Let's examine some of the evidence that Harper Lee placed several rebellious adults in her novel.
First and foremost, Atticus Finch. Yes. Would you like to talk about his most obvious rebellion against his culture?
His fight for Tom Robinson.
Right. Yeah. Elaborate, if you will.
Just the people, it was a very racist time, and he was basically fighting a hopeless case, and as far as I know, he knew it was hopeless the entire time. But I think just for himself and to his, I guess, the children around him and maybe even the community, although I think they were pretty close-minded, but just even for his kids, I think he wanted to keep fighting just to show them something different and show them that things shouldn't be like this and that they deserve better, even though he knew that Tom Robinson would not get better.
Would not get justice.
Yeah, like wouldn't get the better part of the justice system at the time.
Right. I think he mentioned somewhere in the novel that he couldn't live with his conscience if he hadn't, devoted his energy to this case.
Yeah, he knew, throughout the whole book, he knew he wasn't gonna win, I guess. He even says in our courts, when it's a white man's word against a black man's, the white man always wins. So he knew.
Right, and he went ahead. He also said afterwards that, yes, I didn't win the case, but I made progress. He said that the jury had nearly rejected the sentencing, or almost declared Tom innocent.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess because the evidence was so obviously was so strong in support of Tom Robinson's innocence that the jury started thinking.
Yeah.
I think we're in the same position now. A lot of people are realizing the evidence for a pandemic is so weak that they're starting to ask questions. And hopefully people are also learning that you can get sick from a lot more than a germ. And it's not the germs that are killing us. We're being wiped out by things like heart disease and cancer, not germs.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what else does Atticus do? He barters with the Cunninghams. So what? Sounds like. Go ahead.
He wasn't helping I guess the government wouldn't like that because he's not helping them with just the sales taxes, because that's what entered during Great Depression.
You might be right. I haven't checked that. That's what I assumed also, that governments wouldn't like that. They can't collect taxes on that. It's not officially business, I suppose. It's certainly. Go ahead.
That's I did some research, and sales tax entered the USA in the 1920s and 30s, exactly when the Great Depression was happening. And I think that continues today even. It came to my mind when Canada legalized weed. It's the profits that were coming through illegally selling weed, now they can gain profit off of that for when they legalized it.
Right. Also, I think the Cunninghams, the whole family, had a policy about money. Well, maybe it's not just a policy, but they didn't have any. They couldn't pay for it, and I think
they didn't accept money either.
Correct. I think I mentioned briefly in last episode that was probably their way of refusing to participate in our economic system, because they had been, or they had either been or already seen too many farmers shafted, cheated by greedy bankers who claim your entire property if you don't pay for a couple of months, even though you've been paying for years or decades.
Yeah.
A lot of farmers lost their property during the Great Depression. Here's my shocking insight into, I don't know what chapter it is anymore. Atticus helped Miss Maudie commit arson. Her house did not burn down by accident. What's the evidence? Was this necessary? What do you think?
Was it necessary?
Well, what's the evidence first?
Probably when he knew to go run in and, what did he do? Did he help her take things out of the house while it was burning?
No, he stood by.
Oh, okay. Because I think I read like he helped her carry out her chair like right at the beginning.
Let me pull up the text and we'll have a quick look. Okay, somewhere around here. Oh, they're going to bed and it hasn't started yet, I guess. Um, okay. Mr. Yu, did I lose the page?
I think you're.
All right. Okay, so Miss Maudie looked around and the shadow of her old grin crossed her face. I always wanted a smaller house.
So it already sounds like she's being sneaky about how not sneaky, but she's hinting that like there was a purpose.
Right, and she's certainly not grieving. Yeah, you might expect her to. What does she say about her house?
You aren't grieving, muddy, grieving child. Why I hated that old cow barn. Thought of setting fire to it 100 times myself, except they'd lock me up.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. She calls it an old cow barn.
Mm-hmm.
If that isn't an exaggeration, if that is close to the truth, what does that tell you about, American communities and culture leaving an elderly woman? Well, I don't know how advanced she is, to live in this really uninhabitable home.
Well, they're not taking care of them very well, that's for sure.
No, right. And this still applies today. There are millions of people living in trailer parks. They might now have 1 million people living in tent cities, for all I know, mostly in California, where I think something like half of the nation's homeless people are living.
Yeah.
And then I think the most revealing and statement by Miss Maudie is on this paragraph. So little Scout is kind of shocked, but your house is disappearing. You won't have a house. To which she says, you want to read that one?
Don't you worry about me?
Yeah.
Don't you worry about me, Jean Louise Finch. There are ways of doing things you don't know about. Why, I'll build me a little house and take me a couple of roomers, and gracious, I'll have the finest yard in Alabama. Those Bellingraths look plain puny when I get started.
All right. The key line, I think, there are ways of doing things you don't know about. What does that hint at?
That she got rid of the house in ways that house went away in a way that Jean Louise won't understand right now.
Right, and she can't say it to her.
Yeah.
Not necessary to say it. Other hints are, I think, earlier in this chapter, we find Atticus starting the fire in his home stove. Just seems like a random detail.
Mm-hmm.
But in the context of an arson, we can now guess who is the arsonist. And being a lawyer, he would know how to be careful.
Know how to cover up evidence that they'd look for.
Yeah, precisely. There's one benefit to being a lawyer. He hated his job. We learned that in chapter 1, after he had to defend how should I describe them? Unapologetic murderers of an innocent man. He had to defend them. And, what kind of job requires you to defend murderers? It's an awful way to make a living.
Right.
Kind of like working for the American military industry. How could you do that on your conscience, knowing that women and children will not be spared? I don't know. I guess we can move on to who's next? Miss Maudie Atkinson. How does she rebel?
I need you to close your, stop recording your screen so I can see mine.
Oh. No problem.
Thank you. Miss Bonnie Atkinson. Oh, I remember. She rebels against her Christian community.
Right, by tending her garden.
Doesn't go to church.
No, apparently not. There's no evidence that Atticus spends much time in a church either.
Right.
We don't see him praying to God for help when he's in a difficult situation. I think who else rebels against church going? Do you remember?
Does Atticus take the kids to church?
I think it was who is the helper in the family, the maid.
Right. I can't remember her name.
Neither can I. Anyway, I'll come back later. She does take the children to church, and they learn there that there is also discrimination in that church, discrimination against whites.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the message there is churches are not the solution to a racist community.
Yeah.
I don't remember Jesus saying, love Black people, love brown people, love people of all colors.
They don't follow that for sure.
No. Oh yes, that reminds me, the Radleys.
Mm-hmm.
Let me pull up, the text again and find the key phrase here. Where's my share button? There we go. Key word was unforgivable, if I can spell it. There we go. The misery of that house, the Radley house, began many years before Jem and I were born. The Radleys, welcome anywhere in town, kept to themselves. A predilection, unforgivable in Maycomb. How ironic.
Mm-hmm.
The church teaches forgiveness, but if you don't go to church,
you can't be forgiven.
Yeah. And so that is the root of their being ostracized.
Right.
Yeah. Of course, this aspect is not examined in classrooms, English classes, that teachers are not attuned to anything to do with religion in the books they read.
Yeah, it's pretty much ignored.
Yeah, and it's really critical to our culture, maybe even more so American culture.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. There was that other good quote by Miss Maudie. She is the most outspoken character in this book. There we go.
Oh, about the people who worry about the next world they're going to live in.
And neglecting this world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? She said, and you can look down the street and see the results. What do you think was mostly on Miss Maudie's mind or in her eyes?
You can look down the street and see the results.
What do you think she was looking at? Or thinking about?
I've never learned to live in this one. I honestly don't know. The church.
Think again about her her favorite hobby.
Gardening.
And when she looks down the street, what is she going to see?
Just like city.
Yeah, small town.
Yeah, the town.
What do people have on their property?
Probably no plants at all.
Probably no plants at all. Indeed, if there are any plants, they will be decorative plants.
Flowers and trees.
Yeah, shrubs that don't bear any food.
Yeah.
And maybe not even any indigenous, or what are they called? Indigenous plants. So
Yeah.
there's an important lesson here, of course. As you and I, we were just talking about the signs of stress on our food system, our food supply system. I had watched that video earlier today about thousands of cars apparently lining up in, I think it was San Antonio, Texas. People waiting in line to get food. It's never a good idea to depend on other people for your food. Atticus and his brother grew up on a farm that was independent. The only reason he abandoned it was, I think, that the Great Depression somehow made the farm unsustainable, which tells me it wasn't run properly, or perhaps greedy governments were.
That's what I was going to say.
Perhaps they tried to confiscate it on account of not paying property taxes. That doesn't make sense, though. His sister was still living there.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a matter of not running the farm well enough.
Well, it could be possible, even if she was living there, she wasn't following what the government wanted her to be doing with it.
Yeah. Last point for Miss Maudie. She does rebel in terms of clothing too.
Mm-hmm.
At least half of the day. She does like to wear a dress in the evening and bask in the glow of the sun, I think, or afternoon. And in part 2 of the novel, what does she convince Scout to do?
To wear a dress in front of the ladies at the Christian Missionary Club.
Right. So it was difficult to convince Scout. It was a big concession or compromise. Do you think that was a necessary compromise? And is there a message here?
I'm not sure it was. I guess it was necessary to them what they thought was necessary, but I don't know if Scout really should have needed to wear that dress, and especially if Miss Maudie is so rebellious as her own, she should, I guess, help the kids be open-minded and rebellious too. But yeah.
I guess maybe the message is there is a limit to how much you can rebel in certain situations, and wearing a dress one afternoon in order to avoid some larger trouble might be worth it. Perhaps. Yeah. I could talk about the costume she wore at the end of the novel when she dressed up as a pork chop. But maybe I'll leave that for the day we discuss food. That costume, the pork chop costume, or it was a ham, yeah, costume. It was very confining. She wasn't able to run, and it was the primary reason Mr. Yule was able to catch her. So there's a message there about what kind of clothing you choose to wear. It's almost like he's the hunter and he was going after a girl dressed as a ham. This is very ripe for interpretation. Mm-hmm. She's dressed as a piece of meat.
Yeah, and he's chasing the meat.
So what does that mean from a feminist perspective?
Like he's going after the woman.
Yeah, women who, what's the word, exhibit their feminine qualities, expose them,
Right.
you know, in order to, perhaps not consciously, in order to attract attention, unwanted male attention, do so at their risk. Unfortunately, I'm not making excuses for crazy men. It's
Right.
just reality. They're out there. Dolphus Raymond. Do you remember him?
Yeah, he's a wealthy white man who lives with his was she his wife, the black wife,
Yes.
and his I guess his mixed children.
I guess so. Why did he choose to be with them and rebel against?
Does he just I guess he just preferred living among I don't know, did they specify why he chose to live with them?
I don't think it could be specified very clearly, but
No.
I think in the context of this novel, you can guess why.
He just preferred living among blacks, I guess.
Yeah, most of the white people, except for Atticus and who else? Most of the white people in this novel are very unpleasant. I'm just trying to think of exceptions to that rule. Miss Maudie and Atkinson. Miss Maudie and Atticus.
Yeah.
That's funny. I mixed up Atkinson and Atticus because I've always felt that the author hinted that they were actually a couple.
He did kind of do that a few times.
I thought so too. So in that way, they might be rebelling against the marriage institution.
Yeah, they don't live together. They don't state that they're husband and wife.
Right. Okay, so Dolphus rebelled by not socializing with his own race. How
Pretending to be drunk.
Sorry, say that again.
He pretends to be drunk so that like the Maycomb residents have a excuse for his behavior. Why he lives with them.
Right. So this reminds me of a scout having to wear the dress on special occasions. You're trying to avoid trouble.
Yeah, just pretend that you're enjoying the dress to fit in.
Yeah, briefly. So very clever characters. Let's discuss the useless government side of this discussion today, this podcast. We already touched on school. I thought maybe we could mention briefly Miss Gates' teachings on the Nazis in part 2, and she, of course, denounced and condemned what the Nazis were doing, the Germans were doing in Germany. What did she forget to do? She's condemning the discrimination of the Nazis against the Jews.
Right.
But what is she forgetting to do concerning America?
Like talk about racism
in her own country.
Yeah, because basically, not it's obviously the genocide is different than racism, but it's the same idea.
Absolutely. And it could result in the same thing.
Yeah, sure.
And as some researchers have pointed out, the eugenics concepts were actually borrowed by the Germans from America. They may have had older roots in England via Darwin and others, who knows. But yeah, this is a habit people in any country have, not only teachers. They love to imagine that their country is so good and that bad things happen in other countries.
Right.
We don't like to look in the mirror.
Miss Gates, I'm pretty sure she walks out of Robinson's case too. Doesn't she leave when something wasn't going as planned? Maybe it was when they started to become convinced that he may um, not be like the case is not true and fake. She leaves, and then Scout brings that up to her dad, asking her like if it's okay, like just asking about that, why she left the courthouse. And um, in that moment, Atticus says, he brings up Hitler and says it's not okay to hate on anybody.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know that section.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a big book, and I've been, of course, forced to read many other books at the same time. All right. What about the school's final? Oh, we already talked about that big performance, dressed as a piece of hand.
Yeah.
The justice system. We talked about that, Robinson's trial, and Atticus' initial falling out of love with his job, let us say. The firefighters, of course. That's another government-sponsored
Job.
Profession. What happens with the firefighting in this story?
Did they come on time to? They had like a lot of trouble putting out Miss Maudie's house when it was on fire.
Putting out the fire, yes. They had some trouble with the fire truck. They had to push it, I think.
Yeah, and then it only held a little bit of water, and Maycomb didn't have fire hydrants.
Right. So
And I remember also the men of Maycomb thought it was too cold to volunteer to fight the fire.
too cold. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Maybe now they think it's too risky to fight fires. Might get COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
Who funded Atticus Brothers' University Medical School studies?
Atticus?
Indeed, he did. He got his own law degree first, and then he funded his brother.
Mm-hmm.
Is the message there?
I'm not sure, because Atticus didn't even go to school prior to getting his degree.
Right.
So I can't even understand what his opinion on education was, especially considering he seems so anti-following rules, anti-government, I guess, like pro-anarchism. So I'm not sure what he thinks about school systems.
I think he went there out of desperation to get a job that would earn some money for him.
Mm-hmm.
One of the largest sources of debt in the United States, and Canada too, I imagine.
Student loan.
Student debt. I think it's now 1.3 trillion.
1.5 trillion in the US.
Right. Like when you were born, it was 1 trillion.
Yeah.
So it's out of control. It was hard to get jobs 10 years ago, last year. Lots of people with PhDs with no jobs and a lot of debt.
Mm-hmm.
Atticus made sure his brother did not go into life with a debt on his back. It's family taking care of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Big message there. Don't depend on the government, or even perhaps worse, bankers. There was a nice comment somewhere in the book. The narrator, Scout, said something like, her father and his brother never went to school and they seemed to know everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, like I tell my students sometimes, no offense, but anything I know that's worth anything, I did not learn in school. That includes my university and master's degree. I got to exercise my writing skills. That's about it. Welfare. What did the government do to help people through the Great Depression that was, in fact, intentionally created? Intentionally created, I was going to talk about that last time. Anyone can go to the Federal Reserve website and find former chairman Ben Bernanke admitting that, yes, we did it, we won't do it again.
Like they intentionally created the Great Depression.
Yeah, and that's obvious. You create the stock market bubble just by lowering interest rates so everyone can get cheap credit and dump it in the stock market. And then the people in charge of of the interest rate say, let's pop this bubble, let's raise it, let's raise the interest rates. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3. I mean, there's no way it happened by accident.
Yeah, it was always, when I learned about it, it was always kind of shocking. Like, it always seemed kind of messy to me how something like that would happen.
Yeah.
So it would make sense for it to be created.
Yes, your sound quality started getting glitchy there.
Oh, I was just saying how, like, when I first learned about the Great Depression, it just sounded really messy. Just how it was created, like how everyone could get loans and everyone could, just the whole situation that's led up to the Great Depression. So because of how messy that whole situation was, it would make sense for it to be created intentionally.
Yeah, people are in charge. You know, the economy is not some natural phenomenon that we're participating in and have no control over. It's 100% human man-made. How could things happen accidentally? It's hard to imagine, especially when a few people control interest rates.
Right.
You know, you might as well be saying there's a man sitting behind the car wheel in charge of the steering wheel, and you're not noticing him and you don't think when you hit an object that person is responsible.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, because economists and schools generally don't talk about central banking and monetary policies, so we all remain clueless.
Right.
Yeah, last note maybe. Medical system, should we wait? Maybe let's save that for, well, it does, I have decided to connect it to personal bankruptcy. Okay, we've got Miss Dubose, or Mrs. Dubose, I forget. The very cantankerous, ill-tempered, foul-mouthed, racist, just nasty old woman. She's sick. Does she have a government-paid, government-trained nurse taking care of her?
She does, doesn't she?
No, I don't think there's any sign of one.
No? So that means they left her all on her own.
Right, and how can she afford her prescriptions? She must have had something, right? She was addicted to her drug. She decided to go clean at the end.
Right, yeah, she was, it must have been some kind of pain reliever, wasn't it?
Probably some kind of opium or opium-derived pharmaceutical. I've always thought that the flowers on her yard, the ones that Jem destroyed, symbolized the medicine she needed, and that's why she was so upset.
Right.
What kind of flower produces painkiller?
A flower?
Yeah, a very special flower that produces a painkiller.
I'm not sure.
It's probably illegal to grow here. It's the original poppy flower.
Right, yeah.
not the ones we use on Remembrance Day.
Yeah.
Right. So there's another message, if you want to, well, there's debt again, of course. The medical expenses are the leading cause of debt and bankruptcy in the United States. If you can grow your own medicine, you avoid that danger. What can we grow easily in Canada? We now have permission to grow what?
Marijuana.
I think it's 3, 4, maybe 5 plants. I think a lot of people still haven't clued in that this is medicine.
Yeah.
The pioneers brought it to North America.
It's still very much used recreationally.
Yeah, I don't think the pioneers brought it for recreational purposes.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either.
No. And drinking parties were not even normal back then. These are all expressions of where our culture is going. We're kind of, it's not medical use of alcohol, but it's kind of therapeutic. People need this to relax and to let go of all their stress.
Right.
So let's wrap it up. What I think we've already discussed how this is useful to our current situation, a situation in which we may find more and more people without food, more and more people unable to afford their medicine, more and more people living in homes that are not suitable. What else?
I think in the end, it's just we can use the message to promote being able to take care of ourselves without depending on big industries, big companies.
And government. Correct. Very good. That's it for tonight, I think.
Perfect.
Thank you very much, visiting scholar Sasha.
Of course.
Well, we'll try to do part 3 and 4, maybe with other guests.
Perfect.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Good night.